Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen.
With me today is abundance teacher and money coach, Jody Lynn Craven.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. Jody Lynn, we often make reference to people pleasing, right? I mean, it comes up all the time in our conversations, our meetings with guests and so forth. We haven't really done a deep dive on it, though. Not that I can remember anyway. We might have at some point, but we haven't really done one. Let's put it this way. We haven't done one lately. So get on your diving gear because we're going to do one today. Our guest today is Marina Pearson, and she's connecting to us from Spain, which means it's very late where she is as she's doing this. So we really appreciate her for that. But she is something of an expert on the topic. And so, Marina, first of all, thank you for joining us this very late hour where you are at right now. How are you doing this evening?
I'm great, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're glad to have you. So people pleasing, like I mentioned, is something we've talked about off and on, and it comes up a lot in conversations. But let's hear what your story is. How did that become a thing for you to come onto a podcast and talk about? Because it's not just on a podcast. I mean, you do this. There's like a whole panoply of things that you do on this topic. How did that come about?
So, gosh, it as all of these things, it's not linear. Although it may look that way when I share the story, but for me, it was a surprise, to be honest, that I even had any people-pleasing tendencies. It was just this one of it sort of started to dawn on me that maybe I did. But it really started with a heartbreak or a breakup with somebody that that it lasted for literally, I don't know, we went out for about 3 months, and then he decided that he didn't want to be together anymore. And it was a really hard thing to move through for me. And I remember thinking, this isn't normal. You know, sort of my biggest pieces of hurt and pain usually were when I was going through a breakup of some kind. So I decided to work with someone to move through it. And she was an attachment theory coach. And I knew nothing about it at the time. I had been in the transformation industry for about 15 years previous. And I had been really down the ascension path, which is very much, we are all one. We are all one energy. We express ourselves in all these different ways. And it never dawned on me that my story, my individual story, was really based around people pleasing. So when we talked about and we explored attachment theory, what I discovered was that I had anxious attachment. And that was very much in line with why I was feeling the way I was, why I attracted the types of men that I did, and why they attracted, like why I was attracted to them. And so the usual thing is that an anxious attachment is you get needy when somebody pulls away, you grab, you grasp, you feel like you don't get enough. And I would attract effectively avoidance. So of course it was the perfect match. But I had no understanding of this. And it was in that exploration that I started to deep dive a little bit more into attachment theory, that led on to polarity work, that led on to me deep diving into what my actual story was. And I discovered that actually as I sort of wove the thread and I looked at the tapestry of my life, that actually it had people pleasing all over it. And it was funny because as I put the pieces together, there was a lot of shame around that for me, because I never really identified with that as an identity. It was never something that I could say, yeah, that's me. I would look at women who were more like that and go, well, thank God I'm not like that, right? Actually, all along, I had been in that living into that story. So it was almost like a surprise, and yet something that made so much sense to me that I could put a name on it. And for many, many years on this ascension path, it was very much like, we're all one. We don't really have an individual identity. They're just names. But actually, this was really, really important for me. It put me on the map. It was almost like, oh, I can now see where I am on this map. And it was through doing I went through a year's program, particularly for myself, around doing my own work, but also what my medicine was to the world. And as I discovered, it was really to help women to share their truth, embody their truth, and be able to express that to the masculine, and to really own that for themselves. So one of the things that I discovered was that I actually found it really difficult to share my vulnerability with the masculine. And I remember when I got together with my partner now, and I told him, I said, I find vulnerability really, really difficult. And he was like, well, that's interesting, because to me, it feels like, women are supposed to be vulnerable. They're supposed to share their feelings. And actually, it was an interesting journey, because as I unraveled all of this, I realized I didn't really know how I felt about anything in particular. It was almost like I couldn't really diagnose my feelings. It was almost like I neglected my emotional map, my internal emotional landscape. And actually, that's quite usual for the women that I work with. They can't identify how they truly feel, because most of the time they've been looking outward on how everybody else feels and taking care of that, versus actually coming back to myself. How do I feel about this? And so then there was a whole bunch of things around not really wanting to feel. It was way too intense, way too turbulent. And for most of my life, I'd avoided it. And so people pleasing is an incredible strategy to avoid feeling. And a lot of women who I meet, who I've worked with, end up using other substances to not feel too. And so it started all to make sense and slot in. It was like, oh, well, this makes a lot of sense, like it's such an outwardly way of being, because you're constantly looking out for others. But then, of course, it's coupled with, I don't want you to leave me. And basically, the people pleasing is really a strategy to cover up the abandonment wound. And so if I am nice and take care of you, and I rescue you, and I look after you, and I don't rock the boat, and I don't share who I really am with you, then you'll stay. And I'll be nice, and I won't say things, and I won't be who I truly am, at the cost of my truth, my expression, my love in the world, actually. Because what I hadn't really understood at the time was that intimacy can't be had when you're people pleasing. It's just not, it's just, you can't have it, because ultimately you're not really being truthful to yourself. And intimacy is really about deepening one's own understanding of the other. So if you're still wearing that mask, and I talk about people pleasing chains, because I see that when we have these people pleasing chains, they cover our heart, and our heart's not able to be fully in the relationship. It's covered with all these chains. It's just a way to be, but it's not a way to really fully embody love. And so as I journeyed with this more and more, I realized that there were nuances to it. There were ways of being that seemed really normal to me, but actually now would be like, whoa, now moving forward after all these years, it was just, hang on a second, that doesn't make any sense to me anymore. And so part of that would be to not only share how I felt, but also what my no's were, and also what I yeah, like just really how I was seeing things, especially when I had something insightful to say, possibly about the other person, but they weren't ready to hear it. And so all of this was repressed. It was literally like put away. But what I started to see was that even in people pleasing, even when I was attempting to be nice to everybody, um, they would leave anyway. So
Wow.
um, it was not a strategy that was particularly working all that well. But the other thing that I realized is that it didn't really attract the kind of men that I actually deeply longed for. And it was a lot of trial and error. I've been divorced twice. I have had lots of relationships in between, but it wasn't until I really started to, go into this work that things really changed and shifted for me. Um, I would go for safe men, but that never really lent itself to sexual attraction for, at least for a duration. Um, I would tend to, funnily enough, I would tend to attract men that were quite angry. And of course, now I see it was perfectly placed for me to be able to say, no, that's not okay for me. But of course, instead, I would blame myself and I would take on the anger and think that I'd done something wrong. Um, and so, in the understanding of all of this and understanding that actually wanting to keep peace and the harmony and not wanting to rock the boat was at a huge cost to myself. And this has really been about a journey coming back to standing up for myself, not abandoning who I truly am for the sake of somebody else validating me. And that's definitely been a journey.
It sounds like it. Yeah. I'm also curious. You mentioned the safe men, not a lot of sexual attraction, but safe. What made them safe?
Well, they were more in their feminine, I guess. So,
okay.
Yeah, they weren't so much in their masculine energy. So what that means would be I would end up sort of looking after them. I would kind of be the masculine energy in the relationship, or in other words, the mother-son dynamic, where I'll come to me, I'll look after you, don't worry, I'll take care of things for you. But actually I was longing, not that I understood at the time, but now I look back at it, it was like I was longing for a relationship where the guy was just like, let me take care of you. And I've got you and I'm here for you and I want to support you and I want to be of service to you. So you can imagine my surprise when I attracted my partner in, and in the first couple of months he said to me, please just let me know what you want. And I was like, well. And I find myself having these tantrums in my head because I was like, well, hang on a second. Surely you should know what I want. Like, are you that thoughtless? Like, you don't even sort of know where to have that awareness, of what I might like, or be even observant or ask. Why do I have to be the one to tell you? And this lasted for about 6 months, where I would reluctantly tell him. But I realized over time that the reason why I didn't like that dynamic we were in was because I found it so difficult to tell him what I wanted. And I was so scared that he would say no. So it was almost like, well, why should I be the one? And then the subconscious is like, well, I don't want to be the one, because what if you say no to my need or my want or my desire? What happens then? I then have to be the one to forfeit my own emotional well-being here. And so why don't you just ask me why don't you just ask me if I like this or like that? But he was saying, what do you want? And it was a real eye-opener for me. Because I'd actually never really considered that sharing what I desired was actually a real turn on for the masculine. And it was just my little girl, you know, that little girl that wants to please everybody. She's like, well, I don't know what I want, but I'm going to ask you what you want. And you'd be like, oh, I don't know. So I had to learn to really get clear on what I want and know that my desires that come through me are divine. They are divine. They come through me in the expression of the feminine. For the masculine, in this case, my partner, to be of service to that. As he says to me, he's my wandering knight.
Wandering knight. Okay.
Yeah. So he really understands this. I mean, he understands that he wants to be of service to me, and not in the sort of, oh, I'm going to use you, you know, and you're going to do everything I tell you to do. It's not that. It's more like, how can I be of help to you? What can I do for you? How can I make life easier for you? And honestly, for me, it's been such a gift and an eye opener. But of course, at the beginning, I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't even like aware that there was anything more that I needed to become to be able to fully appreciate and receive that from him. So it's been a journey. And ultimately, what I realized over time was that there were three things that if people pleasers are, I mean, basically, if we look outside of ourselves for something from another person, it's a tall ask, especially when we expect that from them. And so I created something called the feminine searching triangle, which is basically when women look for safety, appreciation, or validation outside of them. There are all sorts of weird and wonderful behaviors that actually show up. And safety, when I was sort of reflecting on it, safety is possibly where we repress our truth and our desires and all of that because we don't want to rock the boat. We want to keep everything safe. Validation is more like I acquiesce to what you want all of the time because I'm not really even sure what I want. And then there's the whole kind of narrative around I can't trust myself. I can't trust myself to make a decision because ultimately I need to be validated from the outside. Is this right? Is this wrong? I doubt myself all the time. And so ultimately that kind of leads into lack of trust and self-abandon. You know, I hear a lot of women say, I just totally lost myself in that relationship. Well, that is them looking for validation. And then finally, this piece about appreciation, which is the sort of the rescuer, people pleaser archetype, where she wants to come in and rescue. And that may look like putting him up, taking care of everything. And that's the mother-boy relationship. So ultimately, she's the one giving, but she's not able to receive. And so she attracts a man that can really sort of fit into that dynamic. And they tend to be little boys. They tend to be quite immature. And also, maybe they want to start moving into their masculinity and maturity, but they feel emasculated because they can't grow into that because she's constantly serving them in that way. So she just wants to be appreciated. And so we can imagine that that's a lot for the other person to be responsible for.
Sure, especially if they don't know what they're responsible for. It makes it even harder. I can say that from experience. I know what that's like. It's funny too. While you were talking, I was thinking about a movie. Most people, particularly people who've been on the show, know the movie The Secret came out about 15 years ago. You know, got a lot of attention. There's actually a sequel, a fictional version sequel that came out a few years ago called The Secret Dare to Dream, which didn't get nearly the attention, but I actually enjoyed it. It was a pretty good story. One of the interesting themes that came out of that story was a phrase that got used a couple of times. And the phrase was, if you don't know what you want, how can you get it? And that's exactly what I was thinking of when you were telling your story. You didn't know what you wanted. How could you possibly get it if you didn't know what it was? So that was
Right.
my biggest takeaways.
Bingo. And so I wasn't clear, I wasn't clear at all. And when I met my partner, I was very much still in the moment of exploring my own sexuality. I believe for many years that I didn't like sex at all. And that it was just something that wasn't that important to me. Well, it turns out that actually that's not true at all. I spent 6 months because it got to the point, and I think this is actually a really important point and something that's not really talked about in people pleasing circles, which is the sexual side, which is, how do you ask for what you want in bed when you're a people pleaser? And because you want to please the other person so much. And I felt really uncomfortable and really unconfident in the bedroom anyway. And so I decided to spend 6 months exploring and getting to the point where if a man, I could just have a good time. I didn't have to get married, or if he left and we never spoke again, that would be okay too. It was just the moment we were having together. And that's where I wanted to get to. And by the time my partner arrived, that's the point I'd got to. So I had moved through and started to see sex as really pleasurable and just a really beautiful act where two people get together and give each other pleasure. But it can just be that. It doesn't have to be anything else. So what's actually sort of transpired in all of this is that as a result of that sort of exploration for myself, I invited in and I attracted in a guy that's really important for him too. And I never thought I could have a sex life like I do. And it's pretty amazing because I realized that when I was clear on what I liked, when I was clear on what I wanted, when I was able to tell him, what made me tick, it was so much easier for it to be a much more pleasurable experience and for us to be able to talk about it as well. Like, what do you like? What do you not like? And so all of that sort of came into being over these last 3 years. And while all of this was going on, I was also in a huge court case battle with my ex-husband, where I'd finally just said no to him. And that just caused all sort of chaos. And at the time, I realized that for me, this sort of standing in my own 2 feet, saying no, telling somebody that it's not okay, was so hard. And now I realize that I was totally initiated into, if she was an archetype, the queen, where she's able to say no with grace. She doesn't need to create all this chaos. But I had to go through all of that chaos because I didn't really know how to say no. And so I did lots of stuff to avoid to say no, and then had to say no, but by which point I was saying no through my actions, but not necessarily just putting my foot down, just going, no, I'm not available for this. I didn't even know that that was an option at the time. So it was such an eye-opener for me in all the ways. And actually only just in the last month, I discovered I'm a 9 on the Enneagram. So 9s are all about peace. They all are about harmony. There are 9 types, and they're the ones who at any cost will want to keep harmony within the tribe. And of course I'm like, oh wow, well here we go. This is interesting. Again, like this has come up. I'm also a manifestor in the human design, and manifestors are very unique in that they have a closed aura. All the other energy types are open, and we're about 9% of the population. And we tend to repel. So you can imagine, of all, like, all of these sort of experiences and profiles, I was like, well, God, no wonder. I'm a 9 Enneagram. I'm a Manifestor archetype. I have, if I look at Chiron in my chart, it's in Aries and in the first house. And Chiron in your first house also talks about this very thing, like not really knowing who you are, people pleasing is. So it's all there. Like it was like, it's all written in the stars, and it was already in my human design type, and it was already in my Enneagram. So interestingly enough, often what we overlook is right there staring us blindly, staring us right in the face if we look a little bit deeper. And so with women, usually what I do is most of the time their symptoms are very clear to me. It's like they find it really hard to share how they feel. There is an energy of resentment that shows up because, of course, what happens is when you're not expressing how you feel, when you're not expressing your truth, when you're not expressing your nose, when you're not expressing, you start to resent. And you either go into a place of not sharing, closing down, or you go into a place of reactivity where it's chaos. It comes out all wrong, and it's just like a bomb waiting to happen. But not only that, the types of men you attract into your life also quite reflective of where you are. So it's quite a few things combined. They may have never really had a proper relationship where they felt seen, heard, and acknowledged. They may well have always chased after relationships that were never really going to commit. They may well have just settled and settling. They're settling for something that is okay, but because they don't believe they can have really what they want. And this is a biggie. Like, speaking your truth seems like such a easy thing to do. Actually, first of all, you have to identify what your truth is. Like, what is my truth, regardless of societal norms, regardless of conditioning, regardless of all of that, in spite of all of it, what is my truth? And then secondly, it's like, well, once I understand what maybe one bit of my truth is, I need to go and express that. Well, what if I get rejected? What if they don't like my truth? What if it causes a massive amount of chaos? What if like I have to rearrange my entire life because of this truth that's coming through me? That's way too scary, and it's certainly not something that I want to be doing. I just want to keep the peace, because if I keep the peace, they won't leave, and I'll be okay. And so and then finally, sort of honoring your truth. Like, there's one thing to express it. There's one thing to understand what it is, express it, and then there's the honoring of it, like really honoring of it. It's like embodying that and go, no, this is my truth, and I'm going to stand by it. And that for a people pleaser is like, whoa, that is like, well, maybe not, maybe I won't honor it, maybe not now, maybe later, maybe tomorrow, maybe next month. Because I'm really
maybe when I'm alone in my room all by myself.
Yeah, right.
I keep having that conversation with myself time and time again. So, and also there's this thing around, what if I can't have what I desire? I might as well not bother then. It's too painful for me to even contemplate that I can't have what I really want. But the irony of all of this is that when you get clear on what you want, life just bends backwards to give it to you.
Isn't that funny how that works too? I mean, it's so consistent. That's the theme that shows up obviously over and over again, certainly here on the show. Jody Lynn, I loved your little interjection there, but what have you been thinking about here as Marina's been telling us her learnings?
I see my whole life.
Okay.
Yep, that one. The withholding and not saying anything. Then the explosive. Yep, been there. Yep, that one too. Yep. Every step of the way. And it's so interesting because I didn't realize this was just a woman thing, but like each one of your pieces of your triangle that you were talking about, I was like, oh yeah, don't trust myself. Yep, been there. Like, remember having a conversation with my dad about it. Like, you know, I don't trust myself because of this, this, and this. And I like look to you and my brother to tell me what to do. And like, I would take that role on with, I guess, like authority figures or people that I looked up to. But in relationships with men, I would take the mothering role where I was taking care of them. And so this whole time I've been having flashbacks of every relationship in my life. Like, yeah, I totally relate to that. Absolutely. And I think it's, I didn't realize how normal it is, or how many women kind of go through similar things. Like, I thought it was just things that had happened, traumas that had happened to me that maybe made me that way. But I agree with you, Marina. Like, every relationship that came in, like my very first serious relationship was explosive, and I became a shell of a human, and I wasn't confident or strong or any of these things. I was a little mouse in the corner. And then when I started to see my truth and started to ask for the things that I wanted, it became explosive. And I tried to be explosive, and like it ended very, very poorly, but that's okay. It was meant to. And then I stepped into the mothering. I got to take care of these guys. And the man that I was with and engaged to before I met my husband, it was like he moved in with me because I refused to pay his rent anymore, because I was paying his rent and my rent. And I was like, this isn't happening anymore. I'm not going to pay your rent and my rent, and you live somewhere else. Like, no, you can move in with me. And like, you know, all of these things, like the conversation when we broke up, he's like, you know, you didn't have to keep giving me money. And I'm like, but you didn't have to keep asking for money after. like it was the dumbest conversation I've ever had in my whole life. Well, you did this. And it's like, well, but you asked me to do this. Like, what? I don't understand you. It was just, it's laughable now. And it's really funny because when I met my husband, very similar to your partner, Marina, he wanted to take care of me, and it triggered me. He'd ask me, what do you want? And how can I be there for you? And all of these things. And I was like, I don't know. Like, I had a relationship coach at that time, and I would be in like panic mode. Like, I'm going to die right now because I'm going to say the wrong thing, or he's going to leave me, or like whatever. And one phrase that she gave me that popped into my head as you were speaking was, you are the Ferrari. And so when I would ask for things, this would come in, you are the Ferrari and you got to buy, or you got to pay to drive the car. That was the whole saying. So when I would ask for things and I would be so afraid, I would in my head go, you are the Ferrari. You got to pay to drive the car. If he doesn't want to pay, then he doesn't get to drive the car. I am a Ferrari. Like, and I would have these like pep talks with myself before I would have like these big, like, vulnerable conversations with my now husband, who was my boyfriend at the time. And it's laughable because looking back, he would be like, okay, whatever you want. I love you. Yeah.
It's so funny, you know, the sort of what we create in our own heads and the journey we go on. Because they're just like, yeah, sure. And you're like, oh my God, no, but it was supposed to be more complicated than that. Yeah, I really resonate with what you're sharing here, Logan. And to be honest, it's not uncommon. I remember listening to something where it was Matthew Hussey. He has a business called Get the Guy, what he used to anyway, and he was talking about how you want a builder, and the metaphor was, you both see a really beautiful plot of land, and you both decide that you're going to go onto this plot of land and you're going to start building. And it's all great at the beginning, you know, he's showing up and he's coming to look at the building with you as it's being constructed. And then over time, it's like you spend a lot of time going to the construction site, but he's not there. And he's just like not turning up and not really kind of in it anymore. And I just thought, what a beautiful metaphor. Because actually, you know, you want somebody to build something with you. Like, otherwise, what's the point? What's the point? And I used to be in relationships with, well, my dynamic was very much like, I go with the safe guy, we'd start to build something, the sexual attraction would wane, I would then have an affair. Causing a little bit of chaos because I couldn't say no. Couldn't say no to the guy that would come along, and I couldn't say no to the relationship that I was in. So instead, I would do that crazy thing. And it would always be a guy that would never really want anything with me anyway. But it was almost like an subconscious game I was playing with myself, where it was, if I get him to fall in love with me, that means I'm enough. But of course, he would never fall in love with me, and so it would just reiterate the very thing that I thought I was, which wasn't enough. So I started to realize that it probably wasn't a great strategy, and that I probably needed to change how I saw who I was being in the relationship. To be honest, the big game changer for me was being able to express my truth. My partner left for about 6 weeks. We were together for about 6 months, and I knew, like I could tell, like he wasn't in it committed completely. But I went along with it anyway, and I was doing that thing of being okay with it when I wasn't, just so that I wouldn't be on my own, and because I was so scared I would lose him. And in the end, he phoned me up one night and he said, I don't want to be in this anymore. And I said, well, why not? And he gave me some half-assed comment and put the phone down. So I was distraught. I was like, oh my God, here we go. And I said to him, look, I don't want to end it this way. I want you to come down and I want us to see each other. And if we are going to part ways, I want to do this in a really beautiful, loving way. I can't stand the idea that was the end of the relationship. That sort of can't do it and then put the phone down. So he came down, we had a long chat, a long night, and we left, and he left. And so that was that. So basically, but we always kept in touch. Now I know that most people say, no, don't keep in touch, but something was telling me to keep in touch. And as I journeyed through this rupture, I spent those 6 weeks working with a friend of mine who's a coach, and we really got down to the crux of it, which he kept saying, what do you want? What do you want? And I'm like, he's like, I'm getting really bored of this question. And hopefully you're not getting bored of this question, but what do you want? What do you want in the relationship? So I spent 6 weeks really getting clear on what I wanted. And so once again, like, is this possible for me? My God, like, can I give myself permission to have that? So when I got clear that I could give myself permission to have that it was possible for me to manifest, that it did exist, that this is really about what my heart longs for. It was the 6th week that he started just connecting with me more and more. I just thought, hang on, something's going on. Anyway, towards the end of that week, he said, I want to get back together with you. I made a mistake, I'm sorry. And I said, well, it's all well and good, but I can't go back to the way things were. And if we are to get back together, this is what I need. So it was my first step in going, it's either aligned for me and for you, or it's not. And this whole kind of question of alignment, that was something that I just had no understanding of. Like, it was a word that I'd never heard. It was something that it wasn't even my vocabulary. And it was such a journey I went on those 6 weeks when I realized that actually, if a relationship's not right for one of them, it can't be right for the other. Otherwise, it's aligned or not aligned. And so I then realized that if a relationship is aligned for you, then your truth will take care of the alignment. So if you're not speaking your truth, there is no alignment to be had because it's all over the place. But if you're speaking your truth, this is what I want, this is how I would love it to be, this is not okay for me, the relationship either aligns to it or it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of
So-
nodding over there, Jody Lynn. I mean, I'm watching you as we're listening to Marina, like nod.
But as a people pleaser, that's hardcore. That's a
Yeah.
huge risk to take. Like, oh my God, like, what if it's not supposed to be? And what I've realized is that as I've aligned myself to my own truth and I speak it, the relationship that I'm in now with my partner is completely different to the one that we used to have. So much better, so much more intimate, and so much more honest. And what I've realized is that I've given the relationship the chance that it needed to either align itself or not. And so what I've seen is that while it may take time for him to catch up sometimes, or it may take time for me to catch up, there is a generosity of spirit to wait and be patient. And sometimes his no's are not yet. So I'll give you an example of this. And like with everything, you know, like what used to be terrifying for me, like pit of the stomach, trembling, my nervous system all over the place, now is like so easy for it. It doesn't even like occur to me for that to be anything other than just me sharing my truth. But this in particular instance was a learning for me as well, which was we don't live together. He has a son, and so do I. And we decided that while our children are the ages they are, it's probably best that we don't live together. And it works fine. At the beginning, I wasn't so sure because I had all of this sort of fantasy in my head, romantic notion of getting together and being together as a family. And just it wasn't working. When the kids were together, they would fight all the time. And as we've grown into the relationship, we're finding our way. But what I've realized is I actually really like my life the way it is at the moment. I like the fact that I get to live with my son. It's a very easy, quiet life that we have. And then at the weekends or whenever, we get to hang out with him or his kid. And during the summertime, my son goes off to see his dad, so I get to spend 2 months at his place. So we've kind of created something that works for everybody. And so about 2 years ago, I asked him whether he would want to be the executor of my will, and he said no. I mean, it was really kind of a visceral no from him. It was like, no fucking way.
We're talking serious no territory.
It's just like I am no to that 100%. It's a fuck no from me. So I was quite shocked, and I was actually quite upset because I was like, oh my God, what is this relationship then? I mean, I want to go deeper, and I want to create more depth, and I want to build something more. And I left it. I thought, well, okay, I'm not going to even broach the subject again. That's that. I felt the fuck no. And so I went off and asked somebody else to do it, to be the executor. Now, I haven't done it yet. My will's not been written yet. And I kept on going, oh, I've got to sort it out, And I wasn't sorting it out. Anyway, him and I had a conversation about a month ago. And it just sort of came up in conversation. And I said, it's going to be funny when my cousin takes on the executive role, because I don't think he's going to really understand much of my estate. I don't think he's going to have a clue what I've got anything invested in. Because I've been a bit out there with what I've invested in. Anyway, he comes back and he says, well, would it make more sense for me to be the executor, wouldn't it?
Whoa.
So sometimes it's just time.
Mm.
It doesn't mean anything about me as a person, or they're just, that person just isn't ready. And that's okay too. And love isn't expectation after expectation that needs to be fulfilled. It's more like, I can see that it's a no. It may well be a no forever, or it may well just be a no for now. But I'm just going to go off here and do something else, and I'm not going to get too upset about it, because there's no point putting pressure on the other person. It's a bit like what happened with my dog as well. Like when he first met her, he was like, there's no way that thing is coming into my home. And so I could have just been like, oh, okay. And what was really interesting about it is that I actually kept asking. And I said, hey, look, I really would love to bring her. Can we test it? Can we just test it and see how we go? Oh, that was it. She walked in, and literally she's been going back ever since. They now sleep together on the sofa.
Aww.
But I guess what I'm sharing here is that if there is a truth that wants to come through, or a deep desire from the feminine that isn't from the head, but from like, oh, that would feel really good for me. It can be transformational for the relationship. Mm. And just because the other person isn't ready yet doesn't mean that the relationship is going to die or it's doomed. It's an opportunity just to be gracious and generous with our love, to just see that they're not ready yet. I mean, there have been times that I haven't been ready for something. I haven't been ready to listen to something, or I haven't been ready to take on a role or an opportunity or whatever it might be. You can tell me until you're blue in the face, but until I really hear it for myself, it's not going to transform my life in any way. It's just going to be a good idea. But the moment you see it for yourself, the moment that it's an insightful and a way of seeing that, then it can open up a whole other realm of possibility, not only in your own life, but in the relationship's life.
Yeah. Wow.
Wow. Well, you did ask.
I did ask. What happened? You know, I think Jody Lynn and I have gotten maybe 5 sentences in, and you've been just laying all this out for us so beautifully. It's like, well, okay, why don't we just turn the mic over to Marina? She's got this.
Right.
Jody Lynn,
well, you did. I mean, this is all about speaking your truth, right? So,
well, it is. You're doing a beautiful job. So well done.
I'm embodying my medicine.
I love
That's
also how a big place that you're kind of entering here. You were kind of touching on gaining acceptance of stuff that you can't change because it's not your stuff to change, and instead gaining more acceptance of your own stuff that you hadn't been giving yourself acceptance for before. It's like a change in acceptance focus. That's what I've been hearing.
I love that. Yeah, that's really cool. And you know, we're all prone to focus on things. And so I realized that I could focus on the fact that he'd said no and kept on focusing on the fact that he said no, or just go, okay, well, he said no, so I need to go and find somebody else to do it for me. And so the pressure was off. And I think there's something to be said for that. As a recovering, you know, people pleaser and with anxious attachment, ultimately, usually that means that you will call in an avoidant partner. And I don't know whether he is or not, but he's got all the signs that he would be. And so what I've learned to do is just give him space. And what happens in giving him space is that he comes to me in his own time. I just get on with my day, or I just get on with my stuff. And it could take a year like this did, or it could take a week. And I'll just be like, look, I just want to send this idea over to you. Now it's in your court. I'm off going to do something. I'm going off to yoga now. See you later. and leave it up to him. But I think the journey I'm still on is being able to just say, no, that actually doesn't work for me. And being just really clear about that. But I'm doing it more and more. And actually it's, at the beginning it was a bit messy. And I think what you alluded to that, Jodie, where, you know, you start with your nose or you start with your expression and it just goes totally the other way. So there's something called the shadow pole. I don't know if you know any of Carl Jung's work, but it usually means that when you are conditioned in either one way or the other, you either go to one end or the other. And so when you've had all of this repression going on, suddenly you want to say something and it just literally, it goes to the other side, which is a huge reaction, right? And so it's beyond the two, finding your own way beyond the two. And I usually bring a lot of humor into it, or just wait. Like if there's something for me to say that isn't okay with me or that hasn't sat well for me, I don't have the conversation there and then. I can't anyway. I just get so caught up that I just have to go for a walk in nature or just give myself the time to just calm down, relax, and then come back to that conversation later. And understand, hey, do you get why I was so upset? And he may well be like, well, no. And so, well, then do I have, you know, are you open to hear about it?
Yeah.
So anyway, it's a journey for sure. And there are sort of different stages to it. There's the shackled phase where you're just so oblivious to the fact that any of this is going on. It just seems like everybody else is to blame and they're all bastards and there's no good man in the world. And then there is the sort of unshackling, which is, hang on a second, I'm starting to recognize that possibly there are some tendencies that I have that I'm attracted to that sort of man, or I attract that man because I'm attracted to him. So, and sort of understanding that actually there's a reality that one's created and possibly needs to shift and change into something else. And then there's the unshackled phase, which is you've moved from that reality into the new one, which is the unshackled woman, which is ultimately the one who is free to share her truth, free to express it. And then I'm exploring the sort of the final phase, which is unshackled embodied, which I think is actually even more interesting. Without even saying anything, it manifests itself. When you embody your truth, when you embody your desires, sometimes you don't even need to say anything. It's happened so often now with my partner where I'm thinking something and he'll call me and say, do you want to do this?
Yeah,
Or,
so that's actually a fun phase to be in a relationship, I think.
Yeah. It is, because it moves beyond. It's just so clear to me that the connection, there's just such a embodied connection there already. Or I'll be thinking something and he'll send me something which is just basically what I was thinking about, or I'll have a desire. So we were doing this is actually really beautiful. I was doing a course called The Awakened Feminine, and they were talking about the desire behind the complaint. So anytime we have a complaint about the other person, it's usually a desire that wants to come through, but we just don't know how to share it. So it's like, you never call me. Well, what's the desire? I would love it if you would call me more. Isn't that, I mean, it's just so simple, but yet it makes such a difference in terms of the person receiving it. One of them is blame, shame, and criticism. And the other one is, this is a desire I have. Are you able to support me in it? And I was really ill when I was learning this, and he hadn't called me that day to check in on me or anything, and I was just really upset. And I was like, doesn't care, doesn't, you know. I was in my sort of little girl tantrum, and I was asked the question, "What is your desire?" And I said, "Well, my desire would be to." I was thinking about it in my head. I was like, my desire would be for him to just ask me how I am. And literally, second later, there's a text going, "How are you?"
There we go.
Magic.
Talk about manifesting.
Yeah.
So
That's really great.
it's so beautiful because, you know, this sort of chaotic, painful love story can turn into a magical and mystical one if you dare to go on this journey.
Now you have some circles, you called them. I believe it's the Unshackled Abundance Circle, and you said there's an event coming up. Tell us a little bit about that.
So I have 3 of them at the moment. I mean, this is what's been coming through. So I ran the Unshackled Expression Circle in September. Then I ran the Unshackled Trust Circle in, it was January. And then this one is coming up in the end of June. And each one really points to the feminine searching triangle. So it addresses each one. So the first one was really about looking for safety inside of ourselves and understanding the behaviors that we have when we don't. The second one was all about the trust piece, which is to have our own back and not to abandon, and ultimately to realize that we can trust ourselves and that we don't need to acquiesce or seek somebody's validation to know that we're enough. And this one finally is the one where this is about the feminine being open to receiving from the masculine. So any rescuers out there, this would be perfect for you. If you are emotionally or financially doing it, because emotionally, you know, I used to do this a lot where I used to become their therapist, and they would just tell me all of their problems and I would be like, oh my God, they need me, right? So they'd appreciate me. So this is all about the one where we're searching for appreciation outside of ourselves. And we do that through the behavior of rescuing and being an emotional counselor, if you will. So mother-boy dynamic, financial, and emotional. The whole point to this one at the end is that you actually shift into being able to receive, that you lovingly let your rescuer go, and that you either call in a relationship that actually really starts to support you in that way, if that's really what you want. Because ultimately, this is really about women being able to unveil their own truth in this. You know, I think polarity work can be very prescriptive. And it's like, well, the masculine has to provide. But actually, you know, this whole talk about debate about the date, the first date, the dates, what man is he paying? And it just so happens that I've always been the wealthier one. And my journey hasn't been like most polarity teachers talk about, because my journey has really been about how do I let the masculine in, and how can he support me in the way that he can. It's not just financial. So my personal truth on this is that I can support myself financially. I don't need a guy to do that for me. I really prefer it that way anyway. And he provides in so many other ways, and that's just fine for me. It may not be that truth for somebody else. And I think this is an opportunity for women to really explore that for themselves. It may well be they want to have that dynamic of being the mother, and it works really well for them, and they're really like, I love this. You know, or it may well be that it doesn't work for them, and they think that you have to be this way in order for it to work. So I want to offer that space of reflection and truth telling, but certainly an exploration.
For someone who wants to learn more about that, how do they find out?
So it's www.marinapearson.com/unshackledabundance.
Okay, and we'll make sure we'll include a link in the description for the show too.
And then they can make a reservation in terms of they can have an illumination call to see if it's the right fit for them, because they're usually small and intimate. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Jody Lynn, what's the takeaway? Like, there's only one.
You want me to go?
Go.
Yeah. You want me to do the end? Okay. I got this. He always sets me up for this, but he usually makes it way more exaggerated.
Yeah, I took the pressure off this time. I don't know why. I just felt like you're ready for it. I don't know.
I am ready for it. I think. All right. Of course, I've been thinking about all the things that we've been talking about today. And one of the things, or a couple of the things that really stand out to me is this opportunity for intimacy. When we allow ourselves to understand our own truth and then have the courage to speak it to the people that are closest to us, that we're afraid to speak to, that we're afraid may leave us or judge us or whatever, the more that we practice this vulnerability, this openness, the more we crack ourselves open for the world to see, our partners to see, the deeper that we can get to know ourselves. And I think that's a magical place to be as an individual, a magical place for a relationship to get to, and eventually a magical thing that will influence the world. So thank you for that reminder, Marina.
You're very welcome. And, I'm reminded of how the feminine men are longing for healthy feminine vulnerability. They're longing for it. They feel through our hearts. And so when women are shut down or they're conditioned, it's really hard for them to be able to be who they truly are as well in the relationship, because she's not being that way either.
Yeah. Boy, we could do another hour on that one alone.
Right.
I want to add one more thought, Marina, before we part company. This is based on something that I discovered a couple of years ago while doing this podcast. I've been doing the podcast for about 12 years. And
wow.
Over that time, you kind of, 2,000 episodes later, you learn a few things, Thank you.
Wow.
But one of the things that I learned along the way was we have this blind spot in our society. We kind of ignore this one thing because it's so ubiquitous. It's everywhere. We're so familiar with it. We just kind of take it for granted. And that it is the tendency for people who have learned something, who want to share it with the world, to just put it out there in all different ways. And a lot of people pick up on it. They get benefit from it. And they never get benefited back. They never hear back from somebody like, wow, thank you so much for sharing that. What you just helped me in a way that I can't even begin to happen. It happens over and over and over again. So I kind of like to try to remedy it by saying, on behalf of those people you've never met, you've never seen, never will meet, never will see, who've been seeing you on podcasts or reading stuff that you've written or been a part of your circle, or maybe they saw a video of it or whatever, who you've been helping in ways you didn't know about. On their behalf, thank you for what you're doing, because you're making a difference in the world.
Oh, I've just got goosebumps. Thank you. That's so beautiful. What a gift to receive from you, Walt. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Jody Lynn, I also have to tell you, Marina, like Jody Lynn said, I normally set her up a little bit more than I did this time. I kind of wanted to see how she would handle it this time, just dishing it off to her. She handled it even better than she normally does. You saw what kind of an answer that was.
Said no,
it was a beautiful summary, right? She just summarized it so perfectly. She actually did it better. I didn't think she could do it better. She did it better. It was amazing.
Well, after a truth talk.
Yeah. I never say no to that one because I love doing it.
And you're good at it. My goodness, you're good at it. So thank you guys very much. Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We will see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.